So I'm starting to think that people who sincerely worry about President Biden's age would feel better if they knew more about Vice President Kamala Harris. That if, God forbid, something should happen that made Biden unable to serve, it's important that voters feel confident his replacement was ready to lead. It seems obvious to me that the vice president is absolutely ready to lead and we'd be lucky to have her, and yet so many people, and I'm including engaged, informed people, seem to have bought into this false narrative that Kamala Harris is some kind of a disaster. So I thought I would take a moment to play that out, because I don't believe the idea is based in fact or any real concerns for her actual ability, but rather an incredibly successful PR campaign by powerful people concerned that a potential Harris presidency would not only open the door to women leading this country, but prove once and for all that Obama wasn't an anomaly, and that Black people are indeed capable of leading America. And for many people, that simply will not do. So let's break it down and deal with the facts. What if Kamala Harris did become president? What would be wrong with that? And you can't just say, I don't know, I just don't like her, because it's unlikely you know her. So instead, ask yourself, what is it about her you don't like? And if you can't quite put your finger on it, then I would say, be curious if the problem is really her gender, or her race, or the fact that certain people with deep pockets and media influence somehow got in your head. And I'd hazard to say that none of those things are a good enough reason to think she'd be bad at the job. Here's what I know. Since the day Vice President Harris was sworn in, there has been a coordinated effort to make it seem as if she is both invisible and inept. Where is she? What is she even doing? Our media will report on Donald Trump's plane sitting on the tarmac, but not our vice president building relationships with African leaders, or vetting a now Supreme Court justice, or heading up the new White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Why is that? The fact of the matter is, when you write it all down, Kamala Harris is actually one of the most accomplished vice presidents this country has ever had. But most people don't know that, and that's a problem. Did you know our vice president was the first woman elected district attorney of San Francisco, one of the biggest cities in the nation, a job she was subsequently re-elected to do? Did you know she was the first woman to be Attorney General of California, running the second largest Department of Justice in the entire country, a job that she was also re-elected to do? After that, Kamala Harris was elected to be Senator of California, representing 1 in 8 Americans, and now she's the first woman vice president in the country's history. Now, there's a point where we have to ask ourselves how competent and qualified a woman, especially a woman of color, has to be in this country to be taken seriously. Because to say someone with all of those qualifications is incompetent or unready to lead just makes no sense. In my political lifetime, the vice presidents of this country have run the gambit. I would be surprised if anyone could tell me a success from any of their time in office. Mike Pence is remembered for being hyper-Christian, calling his wife mother, having a fly sit on his head during a debate, almost being hung by a mob of his own party, and failing to help the country as head of the COVID task force. Joe Biden was the good-natured white wingman to our first Black president. Dick Cheney was, for all intents and purposes, the shadow president of George W., who shot his friend in the face and made a ton of money for himself and his friend through American wars. Dan Quayle is literally remembered for spelling potato wrong, and now, thankfully, for reminding Mike Pence he didn't actually have the power to overturn the American election. I think we could safely argue that history shows us Al Gore not only won the 2000 election and should have been our 43rd president, but was a solid VP in the Clinton years, though I believe you'd be hard-pressed to name one specific thing he did during that time. Bush Sr. can be credited with getting the ball rolling with the evangelicals, who eventually got Roe overturned as Reagan's VP, and it was that success that won him the presidency, but he was decimated in re-election because no one really bought his 1,000 points of light leadership. Spiro Agnew took the fall for Nixon, while Ford was simply chosen as VP with the sole purpose of pardoning Nixon, so that's not really a fantastic legacy. I think with all of that in mind, we have to acknowledge that the Vice President of the United States is a fundamentally weird job. You take an ambitious leader and you neuter them to play an undervalued and overlooked second banana role, where they have to prove themselves as a team player until they can potentially earn their party's support to run for president themselves. It's a thankless role, a behind-the-scenes role, a don't steal focus from the president kind of position. You have to defer, you have to dim your light, you have to wait your turn. It's always been like that. But of course, the very first woman to hold a position is being asked why she's not doing more, why she's not shining, why she's muzzled, and she's being held to a far higher standard than anyone who came before. So let's understand the role of the vice president, shall we? 2 of the key responsibilities of the VP are to preside over the Senate and break ties as needed. So with our current Senate, which is no longer a responsible deliberative body, but a battleground of party politics where the Democratic majority has to defer to the Republican minority thanks to an arcane rule called the filibuster, VP Harris has been responsible for breaking the most ties in modern Senate history. Vice President Harris is also responsible for overseeing many of the most important aspects of the U.S. government, like healthcare, immigration, and education. And in doing so, she championed progressive policies like expanding healthcare coverage to millions of Americans, increasing the minimum wage by pushing for a raise for all U.S. workers on federal projects, and encouraging more union membership in the federal workforce. In fact, her work on expanding the unions has union membership up by 20% since she began. Vice President Harris has also advocated for policies that help low-income Americans access affordable healthcare, housing, and education. She believes debt-free college is the key to improving our economy, and there are plans to bring back those key points of Build Back Better should the Biden-Harris administration retain power and regain Congress. Among other things, she's been leading the charge on the Ukraine crisis, making a week-long trip to Africa to strengthen our relationship with the continent, and her trip to Singapore and Vietnam in 2021 laid the foundations for a historic deal the Biden administration signed with Vietnam to not only have them buy billions of dollars in American-made airplanes, but to strengthen our supply chain for computer chips, which reduces America's dependence on China. She has also worked diligently to reduce gun violence, including her extensive work on the bipartisan assault weapons ban, extending background checks for gun purchases, and now heading up the new Gun Violence Prevention Office at the White House. She's been an absolute champion for maternal health, as 50,000 American mothers face life-altering health challenges every year from pregnancy complications, which is just another reason why VP Harris has been such an outspoken advocate for reproductive freedom. Because it's clear that our country shouldn't be forcing women, who are twice as likely to die giving birth in America than they were 20 years ago, to be pregnant against their will. Vice President Harris is a champion of environmental causes, like increasing renewable energy production to combat climate change. She's been a huge advocate for the Affordable Care Act, and she has used her platform to call for the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, both which Republicans defeated in Congress as Democrats were trying to protect our rights. For the entire first term, Vice President Kamala Harris has been traveling our country, highlighting the administration's policies, its manufacturing jobs, and its new grants. She led the small business outreach to get money into the hands of the businesses who really need it, and is working on a $1.25 billion program for small businesses with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, focusing primarily on underrepresented entrepreneurs. Finally, Vice President Harris has been the public face of the Biden administration's response to some of the country's most pivotal events, like the fall of abortion rights, the removal of the Tennessee legislatures for defending gun control activists, and the attempt of Florida Republicans to argue that enslaved people benefited personally from slavery because they learned skills. Did you see the response when she went to support the Tennessee Three, or the powerful speech she made standing up for democracy? Did you catch the incredible articulation of her outrage as she spoke in Florida about DeSantis having the audacity to try and gaslight the American public about our own history? The youth of America did, and they loved it. So if you find yourself being one of those people out here saying she doesn't connect with the people, what you're really saying is that you haven't been paying attention to her over the past 4 years. So maybe we should stop asking what she's been doing. She's been busy. She's been here every day getting the work done for the American people. She understands that democracy is only as strong as the people willing to fight for it, and she's willing to take on that fight. Aside from her popularity with non-white voters and women, young people will be the first to tell you they love Kamala. In fact, many young people say it's Kamala that will bring them to vote for the Biden-Harris ticket. They aren't afraid of the idea of her in charge. Vice President Harris is a reflection of what they, and now critical demographic, want to see in their leaders. So maybe we can stop being so critical of a role that until a woman took it, we didn't pay much attention to. Kamala Harris is more than qualified. She's ready. She's proved she knows how to be a team player, but she can step into the spotlight when she needs to. I personally have utter faith in the leadership of Vice President Harris, but I follow politics for a living, and I've known what she's up to even when the media is not reporting it. But now that you know, I hope you might consider feeling the same. Because if we can just put aside our country's sad history with racism and misogyny and realize that we are in an incredibly powerful position with a kind, competent, forward-thinking incrementalist running for re-election and a powerful, passionate, brilliant progressive waiting in the wings, we will see that we have a winning ticket. And the sooner we realize that, the less powerful those who seek to undermine it will be. Biden-Harris, 2024.